Hello, and welcome to another Brown Bagging It episode. Christine, how are you today?
I am well, very well. Thanks for asking. Ready for an exciting episode with. This is a topic that is always a little ethereal for me, so I'm looking forward to firming it up. A little fuzzy.
Yeah, well, why don't I just jump in and explain it a little bit? We're talking today about cognitive bias. I know, big word. It's one of those words where you almost can't even understand it after learning about it. Uh, but it's very important, especially in leadership roles in business, because you might, as a leader, find yourself biasing your team or making decisions based on a bias that you may or may not know exists. So we definitely want to look at that and be careful with it. But one of the things that I think we usually need to do first is have that brown bag in it check. So it's time for Christine and I to open up our brown bags. And I gotta say, I wish Barney were here, but he's traveling for Thanksgiving. He tried to give us a video clip in time so that he could at least participate, sort of, but he wasn't able to do that. So
Yeah, he's tending to some big family events, so rightfully prioritizing the right way.
there you go. So what do you have in your bag, Christine?
Well, I mean, not only did I knew that it was just going to be you and I, CJ, today, so I broke out our old brown bag and it mug that, of course, I always have to do my aha caffeinated water. I'm not drinking coffee anymore, so this caffeinated water is saving me. But for the cognitive distance, I thought, it made me think of a kiwi because, like, this is a fruit that on the outside is not so awesome. But then when you cut it in, it's got the beautiful green and the seeds,
Yeah.
and it's totally different than what you expected. So hopefully that will be something good to munch on.
You know, I'm glad you shared that because one of the examples, of course, of cognitive bias is the fact that so many people make a decision on buying a book based on its cover. In fact, they say they've measured it. The publishing houses say that a little bit more than 80% of all book purchases are made just because of the cover. Can you imagine the bias that we have on a book? We don't even know what the content is, but we make a decision based on the cover.
And you know what? To follow in more on that is I have noticed because I buy a lot of e-books.
Mm.
It can be tricky too, even especially on a really big one, the Kindle. They try to still do it the cover way. It's you have to do a couple of extra clicks to get to the meat, figure out what's going on with the book.
Yeah, good point. Good point. One of the things I should do is point out what I have in my brown bag today because I actually was reminded of it, so I walked across the room to grab it.
So dramatic.
That's one big brown bag.
That is quite a bag. It seems like there's a lot of people at your lunch table.
It's a frozen turkey for Thursday.
Ah.
Yeah, this is Thanksgiving week, folks, so happy Thanksgiving. We are glad you're watching the show today. All right, so back to cognitive bias, and we'll talk about cognitive dissonance as well. But cognitive bias first. Let me explain it from a certain angle here. Let me share that. Let's pretend that you are a person that believes in ESP. Well, you may or may not have to pretend, but let's say that's what it is ESP. And you need to kind of make sure that it's true. So with cognitive bias, you're going to look for proof that it's true. And you're like, one of the things that I do is I can just sense when my mom is about to call. And all of a sudden, she calls. Wow, I had ESP. But because it's cognitive bias, you didn't consider all the other factors. Like maybe the fact is that you weren't thinking about calendars at all, and she always calls the third Tuesday of the month, And guess what? It just happens to be the third Tuesday of the month, and today you just sense that she's going to call. It's ESP. Well, no, you just haven't paid attention to all the days that she didn't call. So that's one of the ways that we can kind of assess the whole ESP thing and the whole cognitive bias is by what are we not considering that actually plays into the actual happening. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I can see how that really plays into the decisions that we make with our businesses and stuff as well, because then you're not considering the whole playing field.
Right.
So your cognitive bias could be really shutting down opportunities for you, just simply because you were not open enough to it. So there's some value. So there's got to be some ideas too about how to handle our cognitive bias and be a little bit better at it.
Yeah, and I have an idea off the top of my head that I'll share right away, and then we're going to get to our guest who I saw do a speaking engagement on this, and that's what started this whole discussion.
Cool.
But one of the solutions that she talked about, and she'll go into it more in depth, is if you actually leverage cognitive dissonance, it will help you to avoid cognitive bias. But we'll let her talk about that. But the other thought I have is that if you try inductive reasoning, you can also offset your cognitive bias. Now, inductive reasoning, we all know about deductive reasoning because of Sherlock Holmes, right? But inductive is really what scientists use when they look at something specific and they need to draw a general conclusion. So when they're focused in on certain things and they see certain things, they will come up with a hypothesis through inductive reasoning. And that hypothesis covers a little bit more than just what they saw. And then they will test to see the validity of it. So if you start in close and then you come back with the generalization, that's inductive reasoning. Deductive is when you start with the generalization and fine-tune it down to a pinpoint. So by doing the inductive reasoning, you actually force yourself to think differently, which pretty much cancels out a lot of cognitive bias.
Oh man, does that ever apply to global warming, right?
So global warming is an interesting thing because when they first came out with global warming, they found out later I'm talking about from a PR standpoint. Obviously, climate change has been here forever. We've always had climate change. Nobody knows necessarily if it's a 100-year cycle or a 1,000-year cycle or whatever it is, but we've always had change. With global warming, they were, really driving at certain key thoughts based on certain data that they found out was wrong. So then they said, oh, wait, it's global cooling. And then they used other types of data and realized, oh, wait, why don't we just call it climate change and then just deal with the overall picture? So, you have a lot of arguments going back and forth. I don't think anyone's right on any side because I don't think any of us know what we're talking about when it comes to climate.
Leave that one to the side right now. That might be a little hot topic for Christine. Jane, let's meet Jane.
Anyway, let's go ahead and introduce our guest. We have Jane Garvey with us today. And the thing about Jane that I like to talk about first is that not only is she an author and a professional speaker who does hundreds of hours of speaking every year, but she is also a person that really understands real estate far better than anybody else. She has been brought onto radio shows, TV shows, whatever kind of interview segments to talk about the latest things that are happening with the changes in litigation and the legislature. She has also been an expert with the National RIA Association. In fact, I believe she was a part of organizing and starting it. I don't know how many people were involved with that. But again, the other thing that I need to mention about her is that she originally was an engineer. And this was during the time when to be a female and an engineer meant you had to have a lot of smarts upstairs. And she does indeed. So let's welcome Jane Garvey. Jane, how are you?
I'm good. That's quite an introduction to live up to here, but we'll try.
Well, you know, the thing about you is that you have never failed to open my eyes about new topics. And it's just amazing to me how we can be talking about some of the simplest things and we can do a deep dive on it. And it actually becomes amazing in the kinds of things that I learn every time you're in the room. So thank you for that.
Well, you're definitely welcome. And I want to clear something up that you guys were talking about the cognitive bias and cognitive dissonance.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this whole topic starts with cognitive dissonance, which is that uncomfortable feeling we have when we haven't made a decision about something, or we feel like that we're weighing the sides on something. And lots of us try to get away from that as fast as we can. We do whatever research we're going to do. We make a decision, and then we go into cognitive bias or confirmation bias, which is finding all the examples of why we're right.
Okay, so what you're saying, if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying that that uncomfortable feeling causes us to quickly pick a side so that we can feel comfortable again. And then when someone shows up with the opposite viewpoint, because they picked the other side to get rid of that uncomfortable feeling, now there's a sudden battle.
Our minds are closed to the answers. And that particular problem we find when you've researched something online. You start getting the flood of information that, let's say I researched the best type of baby diapers. I have no kids in my life, never have had. But I will be flooded with stuff about baby diapers. And if I looked at, I specified one particular, I don't know what there is about, that I don't like plastic and I want cloth diapers or something, I'm going to get floods of information in all of my various feeds that reaffirm that that's a good thing, where it could be absolutely the worst thing. And if I don't have the integrity or the scientific mind that says I need to keep this open so that I can view other data coming in from other directions, other people's opinions, other information, I can be sitting there in a totally ignorant state without being open to changing my mind. And at one of the examples, if you guys don't mind my sharing something at the Masters group, when I first met my husband, somebody at Northwestern, when we were both in grad school, introduced us, and we went out on our first date. And by the end of the date, neither one of us could stand the other one. And the problem was that we had gone to the Art Institute, and if he liked a picture, I hated it. If I liked a picture, he hated it. And the Art Institute is one of those places that you're going to find that. I mean, people have very intense reactions to pictures. And neither of us kept quiet about it. I mean, we told the other person we couldn't stand that picture. And by the end of the time at the Art Institute, he had thought we were going to go out to dinner, but he had never asked me. And I already had other dinner plans. So I got him to take me home, and that was the end of that. Most people, that would have been the last time they ever dated. And we happened to be in the same group of grad students that would go to basketball games and everything. And there were about 15 of us. And eventually we decided that the other one wasn't quite such a bad person, just because they didn't like the same type of art we did. We were both engineers, so art wasn't really the main focus in life. And I ended up with a marriage that lasted just over 10 years, completely compatible. I was talking with you guys earlier that we worked together pretty much our entire marriage. Shared an office, shared a phone, shared a computer, shared duties. One of us would step in when the other one quit, on a job or got distracted from it. And couldn't have asked for a better match, but if I had shut my mind to it with that first date, we never would have had that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm sorry, of course, he passed after 10 years. It sounded like a perfect marriage.
Yeah, he was 40. It was There's way too much of that going on today with young people dying, but I experienced it and it was not good.
Yeah.
And
That's
bringing this a little bit around to business, I mentioned that shortly after he passed, a few years later, I had an old car that I was driving. It was absolutely in bad shape. And I went to the dealer to get it fixed, and it was going to cost a lot of money, more than the car was worth. And so I went upstairs to the area where they sold cars and was looking around at the cars they had for sale. And a so-called salesman came over to me and said, can I help you? And I said, yeah, I think I need to buy a car. And he went, okay. And he turned around and he walked away. And I didn't know where he'd gone. So I kind of was looking around, and he's over standing, talking in a little coffee clutch of other salespeople. And I stayed there probably for another, I'm going to say maybe 10 minutes looking around the cars, and nobody else ever came over. So I went back downstairs, fixed my car, went away, drove it for quite a while longer, and then went to a different, actually a whole different car manufacturer to buy the next car. And he lost the sale. I had the money to pay for it, was ready to buy. Just stupid.
Well, another example of that is Marvin Warnick, who is credited for starting the mood ring craze. Remember those rings or the jewelry that would, by temperature, would change? But, that was a compound that was known, that wasn't used in jewelry. And Marvin Warnick he used cognitive bias in a positive way. He constantly was looking outside of his industry, looking at different articles and reading different things. He's instead of selling jewelry in cases where it was all these little small things, he's like, let's bring the jewelry over to fashion and what's going on in fashion and put the jewelry on the clothes that are at that time. And so I think it was the shell beads, they had a trend that went through based on that by using, looking outside the industry, looking at the industries next to his industry as a way to sell. And of course, with the mood ring, that was a whole different thing. But, he was known for doing that, stretching. I don't know if that's the right way to use it, stretching his own cognitive bias or,
Sure.
Moving outside of cognitive bias to find opportunities in his own industry.
That's an amazingly great example. I mean, it's the thinking outside the box to the extreme. And most of us are biased in that we expect to see what we expect to see, where we expect to see it. And what you just talked about is something that if you do something different, you will quite possibly receive very different results. And he certainly did with that.
Yeah, I'm thinking also that with, you mentioned something that I was a little surprised. I've known that when we search on the internet, it tends to regurgitate back to us what we searched. It comes up in the ads and stuff, but I didn't realize it reflected our bias. So I think that kind of opens a whole possibility, though, when you're putting marketing out there about how you put it to try to delve into a new market. If you know that the way that you're putting it out there kind of changes the group of people that it gets in front of.
I have to jump in and say something about that because I do a lot of research because I write a lot of copy for different companies. And one of the things that I do is I use the internet for the research. So I will quickly explore different things, and within a matter of minutes, advertisements for what I'm researching for someone else start showing up, and it goes into the data information saying that this is a part of my bias. And, Netflix does the same thing. After you watch so many films, they will be able to tell what types of films that you like to watch most often, and guess what they're going to be promoting to you. There's one other thing there, too, that I need to share. When it comes to Netflix and other companies, I mean, they're not the only ones doing it. Hulu does it and so on. But Netflix can tell based on the icon that you're looking at to choose your movie. If you choose more action-adventure movies that have a female on the cover versus a male on the cover, they will put up all the new action movies with whatever female image is in the film because they know you're more likely to click on it.
And maybe we can counter this by taking what they're feeding us and start searching for the opposite. Because that way it's going to confuse it enough that you might get a variety of things so you can actually go back to the decision-making mode instead of just having them make decisions for you.
Oh, and that's a great point. You know, when they start making decisions based on what they think you want to make life easier for you, they're actually stripping you of your own choices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well,
This topic is so broad at the moment, and I guess it always has been, but it's because of the bias that we get in terms of the news feeds and the those things have really made it more difficult to keep your mind open to do the research you need to do to get the right answers for things. And it's very frustrating. I realize they make money doing what they're doing, but it's very frustrating as a consumer of internet news and internet information to have that bias show up.
Sure.
Well, I've heard from a marketing perspective, using it to the way you search or using the Google search bar or whatever search bar, try to figure out the question that the people that you're marketing to are asking. So when you figure out that question, then you can use that if you're online, use it in your title, use it in your script or whatever is a way to, entice your audience, figure out what they're asking. And I think this all kind of plays into this cognitive bias because they're going to be asking questions that are based on, the beliefs that they have.
Mm-hmm.
Or I.
So one of the things you were mentioning, I'm sorry, there's delays sometimes in the computers. So if you need to say something, just raise your, no, I'm kidding. You can speak whenever you want. I'll try not to trample on you. But since I'm talking right now, one of the things that I could have sworn you said when I heard you speaking the first time on this topic was that when we know that there's a cognitive bias, sometimes it's good to allow for some cognitive dissonance into our life to kind of reset ourselves and to double check, oh, wait a second, if I'm feeling uncomfortable, do I lean toward a certain bias or should I be checking out the opposite to find out what is really true?
Well, one of the things that I've found in life is that I occasionally disagree with somebody that I respect. Mm-hmm. And when that happens, I realize the person's intelligent, they know about the topic, and I've got a totally different opinion than them. I need to reopen and re-examine things when that happens. I have a particular author in the real estate space that I have regularly said about him, I don't always agree with what you say, but Sure. You always make me think. And making me think is a good thing because it makes you go back into that mode of cognitive dissonance and re-examine the premise or the results that you've come up with in your first examination of it. And it's something that I wish more people would do. I wish more people would respect me enough to look at the fact that I disagree with them and go re-examine the issue that we disagree on. But I think the problem, it's a huge problem at the moment that they are not getting, they're getting blasted with views that agree with theirs, and they aren't, and maybe a trickle of other things unless they actively go looking for the other news sources and the other information.
I think that's a great point. And one of the things that I should say, by the way, if any of you viewers today have questions about this or want to ask Jane a question, feel free to type in the comments because we can read the comments and we'll be more than happy to add to the conversation with what you have to ask. Christine, what are your thoughts on this whole cognitive bias as far as, how do we get it to work in a healthy manner from a leadership standpoint?
Well, in the art of persuasion, they use cognitive dissonance when you're with somebody that you don't agree with or they're putting information out that you don't want, is to lean in to what they're believing and ask questions to you know, help open up, get them to question as well. So Jane was mentioning that sometimes she's putting information out there. And I thought when you described Jane that you think like you hear somebody that you disagree with and you're like, okay, well, this is a smart person, this is an intelligent person, let me open back up and think about it. I don't think that that's a very typical response all the time. Maybe it has to do with our hurried space or stuff. And so if you're trying as a leader to get somebody to open up and be responsive, one, I would create acceptance and then create dissonance, help them question what they're putting out for you. And so that they're seeing that you're hearing them, you're asking, you're leaning into their ideas, but then maybe help create some dissonance.
One of the things that I found growing up, I joined debate club in high school. Partially, my dad was pushing us into learning Latin, learning, doing debate and those kinds of things. And in debate club, we basically had an issue. And at the time, the Vietnam War was going on, and it was obviously a huge issue with lots of contention on both sides of it.
Right.
And there would be a topic for the debate that was coming up, and you would do your research. And when you arrived at the venue that you were going to have the debate, basically they draw a straw. Are you for or against the issue? It's not that you got to decide whether you were for or against. You were going to debate one or the other side and come up with all of the arguments that you had found supporting that side. And I think if we could have open and honest debates on topics in today's world, rather than just opinions and arguments with nobody ever, this having to research the side you don't really agree with is extremely good in terms of getting to understand other people's views and getting to draw people back together. And as a leader, I think we really need to encourage that.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to find, though, like you say.
Have more debate clubs in high school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Start nurturing that process again.
So,
and maybe
before
instead of inviting people to a duel, we ought to invite people to a debate.
There you go.
The type of debate I'm talking about, where you have to be prepared to support.
Yeah, based on the Socratic method. That makes total sense, yes. So before we go on, I just want to take a brief moment to say that if you want to learn more about Jane's organization and where she's, how she's helping investors and real estate people, you can go to CCIA. And let me see if I have that handy here. There we are. Chicago Creative Investors Association, CCIA-info.com. And you can feel free to look up stuff. She has lots of articles there, and there's all kinds of information about memberships and benefits of memberships and so on. So just wanted to throw a little plug in there for you for just a slight little break here.
Well, I actually saw something very recently that was super relative to that in our conversation, and that's locally to me, there's a new site going up, and it is a car wash on a corner. And a little late to the party, somebody came in and said, hey, we don't need a car wash here. Why are they putting this car wash here? There's going to be traffic and we won't be able to get in and it's ugly. And, other people are feeding in. And then other people were feeding back like, one, you're late to the party. You didn't go to the hearing. To, when they were deciding what was going to happen on this corner, but also kind of pushing back, business owners, why are we not, we need business owners in our community. They help, the tax base, they help with many different things. They bring in different people. So it was kind of this interesting conversation. It was on a next door neighbor thing, I think it was, but it was fun to watch from the side to see how people were coming at it from such different sides. And you could see in the responses the people that were hearing, that were open to hearing a different side, but you could also see the people that were coming back, like hammering harder with their point of view and skipping over the points that they couldn't, debate against. So that's a little bit of a real estate and cognitive dissonance marrying.
There you go.
We have a huge topic going on in real estate at the moment. and that's lack of affordable housing. And there are all kinds of plans for how to get affordable housing, get more of it. But the problem they keep running into, particularly in Chicago, is somebody will come up with a development that is for affordable housing, and they'll go through the process that they need to go through, which starts with the alderman and the community. And the community is all for affordable housing, but not in my backyard. And so the alderman, in order to maintain his position as an alderman, needs to go to the city council and say, no, we aren't going to approve this, because they have to approve it. And it's been very frustrating, I think, for the people that are pushing to develop affordable housing. But if you think about it, in some areas, they're taking all zoning away. And if you're living in an area like I am of single-family homes, and somebody buys the two houses next to you and tears them down and puts up a affordable housing complex, it's going to have an impact on the value of your house.
Sure.
So it's hard to say to that person who says, no, I don't want it in my backyard, or I don't want it next door to me, that they've got no right to say that. But we do need to find the right places for it where it's not going to, ruin somebody else's value for the,
Right. So two things I'm hearing as you say that. One is, for sure, with affordable housing, unfortunately, a lot of times you hear affordable housing and a lot of your past experiences kind of bloom
That's
up.
that bias.
That's cognitive bias, right? Of what's going to be coming forward. And then also on the other side of the corner, or the other side, is when you're living in a place, sometimes our real estate has a perceived value because of what we've built up around it. It is, it's in a prairie area and it's beautiful. So you can't really afford to mess with your perceived value, Yeah, then it's more than just having a home next to you or an affordable housing home next to you. It could really be hurting you in a way that you can't recover.
Yeah, I was very curious as we were moving toward this show today about cognitive bias, and I thought to myself, what are the signs that do I have it or do I not have it? And I'm gonna read. I pulled something up on a website here. I'm gonna just read a couple things to you. Here's some signs that you are biased. You're only paying attention to news stories that confirm your opinion. You're blaming outside factors when things don't go your way. You're attributing other people's success to luck, but taking personal credit for your own accomplishments. You're assuming that anyone else shares your opinions, or I'm sorry, not anyone else, but everyone else shares your opinions and beliefs. And learning a little bit about a topic and then assuming you know all there is to know about it demonstrates cognitive bias as well. What do you think of those?
It's basically, if you've made a decision about something, you've become biased as long as you're unwilling to open your mind to other opinions. And that's usually, once you've made the decision, you've got a bias. And in real estate, another real estate example that I see regularly is people ask somebody to price their house. They're going to put their house up for sale. And the people come up with a price somehow. And initially, they may have had absolutely no idea. Once they've decided what that price is, it becomes a sticking point in negotiation. They don't really want to move off of it very much because they feel like they lost.
Yeah, good point.
And I think if you ever watched any of those Pawn Star shows, Pawn, P-A-W-N, Pawn Star.
I'm sure they spell it that way on purpose.
Where they're negotiating with people. I mean, they tend to ask the person what they want for whatever the item is. And sometimes the person has absolutely no clue, but I want $3,000. And the guy calls in the expert, and the expert says, well, it's worth $600. And the Pawn Star guy goes, well, how much do you want for it? Well, $600. Which, is going to leave the Pawn Star with no room for profit. Or sometimes the expert will come in and say that's worth $30,000, And you'll find that the person is still frequently willing to take far less than the $30,000 because they're still stuck on the $3,000.
Interesting.
Occasionally, and that depends on how much they actually value that expert opinion. Sometimes they'll jump right up to the 30,000, but
I have definitely experienced that where my initial exposure to the cost of something was like, oh, about face. I'm not up for that. But I warmed to the idea over time. Like I would go and I would see that price. Is that a type of cognitive bias then?
yeah. For instance, I mean, somebody prices something high and then they give you a discount. They get your brain thinking that I'm going to have to pay this, and then, oh wow, I can get it for this. So it's setting expectations for people. Sets up an easier road to sale or a harder road to sale.
Right, the store that always has a discount.
Mm-hmm.
You're like,
I mean, people know better. One of the other things that has been frustrating me for years, we have internet searches now for properties. So people will put in a price range, 250,000 to 350,000 or to 300,000. I cannot get through to people's heads that if you price stuff at 249,999, it's not going to show up in that search, where it might be exactly the right house for the person. So if you go out there and look at house pricing at the moment, you're still going to find probably about a third of the places are priced $1 or $100 less than the big round number that they really ought to be priced at. Because if they priced them at the big round number, they'd showed up on the high end of a search or the low end of a search.
That's a good point. Yeah, it never dawned on me that we use cognitive bias as a part of the whole dollar amount when negotiating. But you're absolutely right. There's a lot of things. I'm doing a quick flashback now to all kinds of stuff that I've experienced with numbers. And you're right. If someone says to you, yeah, it's going to cost somewhere between $400 and $600. If they're the buyer, they're thinking $400. If they're the seller, they're thinking $600. And you automatically have this, conflict that you've created just because you gave a range.
Yeah, and I think it's something we need to try to avoid, but it's almost impossible to avoid because it's everywhere in our lives. Yeah. And lots of things we know what's happening, but we just go along with it because it's not worth fighting it. But there are things where it's worth fighting, and that's particularly when you get entrenched in a decision that something's right and something's wrong, and it's not a universal decision. I'm not saying you need to change your mind. You just need to be able to support your decision.
But we've been talking about cognitive bias like it's almost always negative. There's an upside, right? Or is there a positive side, a positive way to use cognitive bias?
Well, I think we just talked about one. If you're the person trying to sell somebody something, you give them a high price and then make it cheap compared to what it would be.
Yeah, I think that, now that I'm seeing how this is fitting together in a much broader sense, as I was doing a little bit of research on this just to kind of wet my whistle before the show, I found out that there was like 6 or 7 different types of cognitive bias. And I thought, oh my gosh, if we actually dove into that, it'd be a 3-hour show. And obviously our time is almost up here, so we can't do that. But I think the bottom line is, if we are aware that there's a bias, the moment we make a decision, we know we are now biased. The key question is, are we open to changing that decision should more information come into play? And I had a conversation with the gentleman not too long ago where I just got the latest CDC report and I was sharing some information with him about what it said. And he was bound and determined to tell me I was wrong and I didn't read the paper. And I'm like, what do you mean I didn't read it? I just said I read it. And he was just fighting me tooth and nail because he had already made his decision on the topic that it was at hand. And he was not going to budge on his decision no matter what new information came from the source that he believed in. So it's interesting that we have to work hard to actually, after making a decision, be willing to take in new information should it come forward.
And that's kind of science. I mean, I'm not a psychologist and never have been. I've took one psychology course in college, but I look at the scientific method as you put forward a proposition that something's true, and you can't let yourself get biased to that being true. You then start doing the research and the analysis and the gathering information, and as more information comes in, you're either going to be proving true what your initial proposition was, or you're going to be deciding that no, that wasn't a good hypothesis. Let's move on to the next thing. And
right, really digging into it too, that the things that you're using as the statements, like, well, this came from here and this is a fact, or this came from here, that you also have to go and walk around those things as well. So where you're at, then you got to go to the next spot and walk around. Like, it seems like there's always the opportunity to continue to unravel and challenge and find.
Well, and a lot of the huge topics in today's world are things that new data is coming in all the time. And if you're so biased that you've made up your mind, a year ago and are unwilling to look at any of the new information that's coming in, you can really end up, basically having problems because of it. And at some point, maybe looking really stupid because you're the last remaining holdout on thinking something's true when it isn't.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Jane, listen, our time is up, but we thank you so much for being on the show with us today. Really appreciate it. And of course, once again, I learned something for you. So it's always good when you and I can connect up. Thank you for being here.
All right. It was a delight being here, and thank you both.
Thanks.
Thank you, Jane. Always a pleasure.
Well, Christine, what are your thoughts? This has been probably one of our heaviest discussions from my vantage point.
I liked it. I'm juiced. Let's do this more often. It's so interesting. I always love talking with Jane. I think at the end there, I was thinking to myself, so the bottom line is free your mind and the rest will follow.
There's something to that. I like the fact that we can use, cognitive bias in our favor sometimes by introducing someone to something here, but then showing them that, oh no, they can actually do it cheaper. I like that concept. I like the concept of kind of painting the picture of worst case scenario first and then best case scenario, and then finding, where you really land. Sometimes when a person has a predisposition in a certain manner, you can carefully walk them through. If you know there's a cognitive bias, you can quickly and carefully walk them through a process to slowly get them to change their perception. But at the same time, there are those people that once they lock in, it doesn't matter what you say, it's not going to change a thing.
Plus, you have to be open to the idea that it could be you that is locked in.
Yes, indeed. It could be me. I was talking to one person the other day, and he was telling me how he used the whole concept of cognitive bias and inductive reasoning to pull away from cognitive bias. And he gave me this example, and you tell me if this sounds like it fits or not. He says, all swans that I have seen are white. Therefore, most swans are white. Now, the biased person would say, therefore, all swans are white. And of course, there's black swans out there. And the biased person is saying that based on their experience only. Where he was using inductive reasoning, saying most swans are white because he knows that there might be other colors out there.
There's always a possibility. What I learned for today. And tomorrow there'll be some new information.
Exactly.
Which means there's always more opportunities in our businesses and stuff.
And speaking about opportunity, do you want to let everyone know who our guest is next week?
Oh, yes. Next week, another fascinating lady, Nancy Depsick, will be joining us. And I don't have the book in front of me. I did order, she's a part of a group, the business group. They all put together different stories about, if I knew then, I'm forgetting the name of the book. I kind of caught off guard, but she just put out a new book. I'm super excited for her to talk about it. It's a great one. You can find it on Amazon. I'll put it in the comments afterwards, but it is a book written by business people looking back with stories, kind of, if I only knew that in the beginning.
If I had only known. Good point. All right. Well, that's all I have for today. I hope everybody has a great Turkey Day and be thankful filled with hearts of gratitude. And we'll see you next week.